Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the fascinating data and behavioral psychology behind why crossing the $20,000 savings threshold completely transforms your life. Seriously, it's not just a nice number to stare at in your banking app. It actually represents a fundamental shift in how you operate day to day.
So let's dive right into the core question here. What exactly shifts in your mind and your reality when you hit the specific financial target? Because the truth is, something profound happens. We're talking a change not just in your bank account, but literally in your brain, in how you make decisions, and even in the speed at which your money actually starts to grow.
But before we get to the psychology, we've got to look at reality. If you're currently struggling to reach this number, just take a breath. Because, as the data shows, most Australians will never save $20,000. You aren't behind, you're completely normal. And I don't say this to be harsh, right? I say it because it's so important to understand the landscape we're all operating in. To put that into perspective, according to recent figures, Australia's household savings ratio is sitting at just 6.9%. And when you factor in that living costs are continually jumping, we're seeing increases between 2.3 and 4.2% across every single household type. It means most people are burning through almost everything they earn, literally just to keep the lights on. Now, you might read headlines claiming the average Australian supposedly has roughly $42,000 in savings, but honestly, that number is wildly misleading. Why? Well, because a tiny percentage of people at the very top pulls that average way up. That leaves millions of everyday people sitting well below that number, with almost nothing in reserve.
Which brings us to Section 1, the scarcity brain trap.
To understand why it's so incredibly hard to build wealth, we have to look at behavioral economics. Basically, being in survival mode induces a state called financial scarcity. This is a condition that literally reduces your cognitive bandwidth. You end up making worse decisions, not at all because you aren't intelligent, but simply because your mind is completely overloaded. You're forced to focus entirely on immediate, short-term problems, which makes long-term thinking virtually impossible. Think about it like this. When you have under $5,000 in savings, your brain treats every single tiny financial decision like a full-blown crisis. Should I fill up the gas tank right now? Or can I wait until payday on Friday? Should I get the car serviced or risk it for just one more month? These constant micro-decisions are absolutely exhausting. They drain the exact mental energy you desperately need to build a better future, leaving you feeling tired, stuck, and frustrated, often without even realizing why.
Okay, moving to Section 2, the $20,000 turning point.
The moment you finally cross that $20,000 threshold, the sheer exhaustion of all those micro decisions begins to fade, and everything just starts to flip. You see, having this money sitting in a high-interest account isn't really about what you can buy with it. It's about having a buffer that completely removes the fear of disaster. If your fridge dies, you handle it. Car needs repairs, it's covered. If you lose your job, you suddenly have 3 to 4 months of breathing room to figure things out, completely without that absolute sense of panic. And this buffer creates a massive positive feedback loop. That newfound mental clarity has real measurable consequences. Think about it. A lack of financial stress naturally leads to better sleep. When you sleep better, you perform better at work. When your performance improves, you boost your earning potential, which ultimately helps you save even more. I mean, even your health improves because you're no longer putting off a doctor's visit just to save $80.
Plus, when you hit this mark, you undergo a fundamental shift in your self-image. When you have nothing saved, you often buy things just to feel better about, well, a pretty terrible financial situation. But above $20,000, you start moving away from emotional, survival-based spending. You stop leaking money on those impulse buys that give you 5 minutes of dopamine and 5 days of regret, like that incredibly expensive blender currently collecting dust on your counter. Your spending becomes highly intentional, and that is exactly what separates those who just earn money from those who actually build wealth.
Now, at the very beginning, compound interest is practically invisible. For example, if you have $2,000 sitting in an account earning 5%, you only make a barely noticeable $100 a year. It's so small that, frankly, it's super easy to get discouraged and just give up altogether. But fast forward to $20,000. With that exact same 5% interest rate, you are now generating a very tangible $1,000 a year, literally without lifting a finger. Your money is finally doing the heavy lifting. You're putting in the exact same amount of work, but the returns are suddenly totally visible and highly motivating. So, let's jump into Section 3, 4 Practical Wealth Unlocks. Crossing this psychological line actively grants you 4 highly practical superpowers out in the real world. First off, having this financial buffer opens the door to actual meaningful investing. Second, it gives you the leverage to negotiate your salary, or even just walk away from a toxic job if you need to. Third, it permanently breaks that stressful fortnight-to-fortnight survival loop. And fourth, it honestly gives you this undeniable aura of confidence that completely changes how people interact with you.
Looking specifically at that first unlock, real investing. With a $20,000 base, you're no longer limited to just a standard savings account. For example, broad-based Australian ETFs on the ASX have delivered average annual returns of around 10 to 14% over the past 3 years. That means your money is finally outpacing inflation and doing the really hard work for you rather than just sitting still. Furthermore, regarding that aura of confidence we mentioned, when you aren't financially desperate, you just carry yourself differently. You aren't operating out of sheer terror about making next month's rent, and honestly, the world senses this stability. When you aren't desperate for the next paycheck, you have the leverage to negotiate much better terms for yourself. Employers, business partners, and banks actually start presenting you with opportunities and responding to you in ways that simply weren't possible back when you were in survival mode.
Which leads us to our final section, Section 4, Reaching the Target.
So how do you practically push through and reach this life-altering target if you aren't quite there yet? Well, you need to execute 3 clear steps. First, get brutally honest by tracking your spending for 30 days. Second, pay yourself first by setting up an automatic transfer right on payday. Seriously, make this non-negotiable. And third, proactively increase the gap between what you earn and what you spend. This could mean asking for a raise, starting a realistic side hustle like freelance consulting, or even just finally selling off all those items you no longer use.
And here's a crazy fact. By simply taking that very first step and tracking every single dollar for 30 days, data shows most people uncover between $300 and $500 a month in blind spending. We're talking about forgotten app subscriptions, those daily convenience store runs, or unused gym memberships that you didn't even realize were draining your accounts. That is pure cash you can instantly redirect to accelerate your timeline. Now, as you embark on this, it's absolutely vital to recognize a harsh truth. The most agonizing, difficult stretch of your entire financial journey is getting from $0 to $20,000. This is the phase where the sacrifices feel massive and the progress feels incredibly, almost painfully slow. Honestly, it's the exact point where most people just give up.
But remember this, the maths works. You just have to stay in the game long enough to see it. Every single deposit, no matter how tiny it feels, actively compresses your timeline. So, knowing what's waiting for you on the other side of that threshold, what small, intentional step will you take today to stay in the game? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep building.